Well, hi everyone. First of all, thank you for choosing this session. My name's Janet Lewis-Jones. And as you know, I'm an assessor with the Investing in Volunteers quality mark, which is what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of context, that's something I've been doing for 20 years now, which feels like a really long time. So I kind of really feel like I've met probably thousands of volunteers across that time, and worked with certainly hundreds of organisations in relation to the standard. So, really enjoyed that experience of just, looking at how volunteers are involved in so many different contexts in the UK. It's been really, really interesting. Prior to that, although it feels like ancient history and therefore not that relevant, my early career was as a volunteer manager within the criminal justice sector, working with probation services who had what were called associates then, which were volunteers involved in providing the sort of pastoral, well-being, practical support to offenders on probation. So that's where my roots lie, but that's an awfully long time ago now. So just a little bit about what I'm going to cover in this session. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to investing in volunteers, and then explore it in a bit more detail, but in particular thinking about how kind of data management within your organization can support you in I suppose implementing investing in volunteers and being compliant with the standard, as it were. So first of all, before I sort of kick off, just give me a bit of a reaction. Who's actually heard of investing in volunteers, or is this going to be new? Just that's it. Oh yeah, great. So got plenty of people there. That's fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, smashing. So hopefully I won't be telling you too much that you already know, but I'm going to share some slides with you, but it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, I promise. We're going to have some chat in between some of that, but just to give you a bit of grounding, let's look at some slides together. So I'll just bring those up if I can. So hopefully you should be able to see those now. So first of all, what is investing in volunteers? So it's described as the industry standard for any organisation that involves volunteers of any size, any structure, and in any sector. And what that means really is it's a collection of criteria, if you like, that you can be assured that if you are working within those criteria, you are doing things both legally and properly, if you like, but also you're doing things in a way that creates a really good experience for the volunteer. So that's kind of what the industry standard bit means. As I say, I've worked with hundreds of organisations over the years, and it really does, one size does fit all in this case. It can be really small, very local, community-based organisations with no paid staff and, just a handful of volunteers doing things for their local community, right through to big national and multinational organisations. The largest one I personally have worked with was the Royal Voluntary Service, and they had about 46,000 volunteers at the time. And it's not just charity, third sector organisations. It's also things like NHS trusts, fire and rescue services. So it really is any context in which volunteers are involved. It covers all four of the UK nations and also the Republic of Ireland, and it's managed by a body called UKVF, which is the UK Volunteering Forum. And that basically is a body that's made up of the sort of main infrastructure organisations in the four countries. So NCVO, Volunteer Now, for example, but also independent experts in the field of volunteer involvement, if you like. So it's a nice mix of people who actually sort of govern the award. Been around since the mid-1990s, and I think it's important to say that its origins are from volunteer involving organisations themselves. So it was a group of volunteer involving organisations in South London who actually designed the award. And then in 2020, it went through a massive kind of review and restructure to reflect the findings of something called Time Well Spent, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which was a really big piece of research carried out by NCVO around, why volunteers volunteer, what they want from that experience. But again, that review, that consultation was carried out with volunteer involving organisations and with volunteers, so that, confidence that the standard is something that's come from the roots, as it were, rather than being imposed from a top-down approach. If you remember nothing else about this little session, just remember that investing in volunteers is a set of 29 statements that describe best practice in working with volunteers, and freely available. You can go onto the Investing in Volunteers website, you can download the 29 statements, and you can use them to review or design your work with volunteers. That's, that's out there, that's open access. Or if you want, you can also go through the accreditation process. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that. But what that looks like is it's a 12-month supported journey where you are allocated an assessor who works with you for that 12 months to kind of get you ready, as it were, before then going through an assessment process and achieving an externally qualified, verified award, rather. So, as I say, it's freely available, or you can go for that independent accreditation. Just a little bit about some of the benefits that people say there are to achieving the award, and this is organisations who've been through the process asked to comment on what they feel the benefits to them have been. So the one that's most frequently mentioned is sort of captured in the top bullet point here. Organisations feel that it's given them a way to create a more structured environment for volunteers and for volunteer managers, and that overall that kind of enhances the volunteers' experience. So it's really pleasing to know that they've used it in that way as an internal looking tool, just to kind of improve what they're doing. But obviously it also publicly demonstrates the organisation's commitment to volunteers, and I think develops that wider understanding of the importance of volunteers within the organisation. So particularly for larger organisations where volunteer management might be a separate department, it also creates that wider I suppose knowledge of what volunteers bring to the organisation across the whole organisation. It reassures budget holders and funders that money's being well spent, which is very important. And also, I think it minimises the risks that there can be from involving volunteers. As I said at the beginning, if you're doing things in line with the criteria of the standard, you can be confident that you're doing them properly, as it were, and that minimises those risks. And if you go through the accreditation process, you obviously get that fresh, objective pair of eyes working with you for the 12 months, just to kind of help you develop and improve your practice, bringing in experience and expertise from working with other organisations. So just a quick discussion of what's involved if you were going through the accreditation process. So you would have a kind of briefing, a getting started session, which would go through all of those 29 statements, make sure that you understood what's looked for, and then that would enable you to move on to step 2, which is to do a self-assessment, which is to go through the 29 statements and just think about what evidence you've already got in place, and therefore what you might need to work on in order to be assessment ready. Getting assessment ready is the step 3, the improving practice phase. And then only when you feel that you're ready and your assessor feels that you're ready, do you actually go through the assessment process. So because of that, almost everybody, 99.9% of organisations that go through the process achieve the accreditation, because you're simply not having the assessment until you're ready for that. Achieve the celebration, achieve and celebrate the award, and then there's a period of kind of just going on with continual improvement, and then renewing the award in 3 years if that's something that you want to do. But won't talk for much longer. Just want to tell you there are 6 kind of quality areas associated with the award. So basically those 29 statements are divided up into 6 categories, if you like. And what I'm going to do is kind of just go through them one by one, but then have a chat about each one as a group when we've kind of explored what's involved in that. So as we go through the 6 areas, I wanted you to particularly kind of focus on what sort of data collection you might need in order to evidence that you meet that quality area, if you like. So think about when you're choosing a data management system, thinking about things that, how can you streamline the whole process that makes it easier for volunteer managers? How can you kind of analyze the data? How can you do the reporting? But at all times kind of ensuring that it's a positive experience for volunteers. So we'll have a look at each one of the 6 and break after each one, just to have a chat about what sort of data you might be able to gather to illustrate that you are doing what you need to be doing in that quality area. So the first quality area is quality area 1, which is all about your vision for involving volunteers. So it's really looking for volunteering to be really embedded in the organisation, in the sense that it's apparent in the organisation's vision, its values, its culture, and the aims of the organisation. So for me, it's about kind of, does your organisation know why it involves volunteers? What's the intention behind that? And then the other half of it is about understanding the impact of volunteer involvement. So it's clear that you kind of, you know why you're involving volunteers, but do you then also measure whether you are achieving that intent, whether you know what you are doing is having volunteering contribute to the achievement of your mission. So it's really just that heading. Do you understand why you involve volunteers? So I'll stop sharing that one there, and then we'll just have a chat about what kinds of information and data you might be able to collect and collate and analyse to show that your organisation has that volunteering embedded in its mission and understands the impact. So anybody want to kind of just either shout out or even put it in the chat if you want to. What sort of things, what sort of data might you be collecting to illustrate that you comply with this quality area? Yep, volunteer charter, someone's popped in the chat there. That's a really, really good one. So that in fact encompasses, one would usually start the charter with the reason why you involve volunteers, and then might move on to include things like the code of practice for volunteers and an explanation of how volunteering works in the organisation. Volunteering policy is another really strong one there. Good to see that Jackie's actually in the process of writing a volunteering policy. And I would say if you're kind of at the early stages of that, there's some really good examples out there. If you look at the NCVO website, for example, or any of the infrastructure bodies, really good kind of checklists of what that might include. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So other things, yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing volunteering mentioned in the main organisation's kind of strategy. I'm actually doing an assessment of an organisation next week, and just in part of the preparation for that, I was looking at their 5-year strategy, and I was actually blown away by how much volunteering was written into that, and you know how much the organisation was sharing how it could achieve its mission with volunteer involvement. People and culture plan, absolutely. That's great actually to see that kind of rolled into, volunteers are part of the people and part of the culture of the organization. So that's lovely to see that thread. It's not just just the volunteering policy, it's embedded. Yeah, inclusion. Yeah, it comes from HR. Brilliant. Some really good stuff there. So I know that part of the conference today is about thinking about data management systems. Any sort of thoughts you've got about how that would overlay onto that? So what sort of things ought your data management system be collecting information about in order to kind of make the gathering of evidence easily? Clear KPIs, definitely. Yeah. So that would include things like, considerations being given to the number of volunteers you might need in order to deliver your services, how many hours you might need those volunteers to give. Are there any particular skills you're looking for those volunteers to bring to the organisation? So all of those kind of things could be represented in the KPIs, and then it would be a case of monitoring and reporting about that. Yeah, that's great. That's lovely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely need that clear ability to run reports. Yeah. Hours, volume, postcodes, age. Yeah, fantastic. So we've got taking on personal feedback you get from volunteers through a system. Yeah, that's really good. And being able to draw reports around that rather than wade through lots of kind of individual comments. That's great. Yeah, everybody's completing a report there to the board. Fantastic. Okay, so some really good stuff there. Brilliant. All right, let's go back to the slides and look at the second quality area then. Okay, bring that back up. So the next quality area is all about how you go about planning for your volunteers. So great that you've got a really clear intent and you really thought about how you're going to measure the impact. So what then do you need to put in place to make sure it's really well managed? So that really boils down to the people you've got in place, the policies you've got in place, and the procedures. So in terms of the people, it's that you've got enough of them and they've got enough capacity to properly look after volunteering, but also that they bring the right kind of competence and the right kind of, I suppose, approach to working with volunteers. One of the things I quite often find with organisations is they sit volunteering under the HR department and have it managed by people who are HR managers. And sometimes there are some challenges in that depth of understanding about how it's actually different managing volunteers than it is managing paid staff. So that's something to think about. What policies have you developed? Have you thought about the policies that apply to everybody in the organisation? So things like EDI, health and safety, and those that need to be volunteer specific. So they would tend to be things like volunteer problem solving and expenses claims and that kind of thing. And it's really important to make that differentiation so that there's no implication of a contract within your relationship with volunteers, because that can get you into all kinds of problems. And then are your procedures nice and clear? And not only are they nice and clear, but does everybody understand them? Are they being consistently applied? That kind of thing. So let's just have a think about that one then. But any thoughts on the kind of things you need to have in place to satisfy this quality area? As I say, feel free to shout. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can speak out loud. I'm quite happy to hear from you. Yep, linking to training portals there. That's great. And I think one of the things to sort of think about with this one is whether or not your volunteers actually also have access to whatever system you've got as well, because that's a whole other dimension, making it user-friendly and accessible to the volunteers themselves. Yeah, absolutely. Understanding who's going to line manage the volunteers and the boundaries of the volunteers' role, for sure. A volunteer handbook is always a fantastic thing to have. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's great. And yes, I think that's, some of the best volunteer policies or policies that apply to volunteers I've seen are the ones that start with that paragraph that clearly says this applies to our paid staff, our service users, our volunteers, the general public, whoever is the subject of that policy. Yeah. Excellent. Oh yeah, like that, Jackie. You very much do need staff buy-in, because it's great. You, as the person who looks after volunteers, can have some brilliant policies and procedures in place, but you need people to work with them. So very much the case. Yeah. Okay. Has anybody ever run into any issues with this kind of conflict between making sure that the way you work with volunteers is different enough from the way you work with staff, so that you're kind of doing things with regard to employment law? Has that ever kind of come up as an issue for anyone?
Not so much issue with employment law, but
Yeah.
in terms of conflict of roles and where they cross over.
Yeah.
Volunteers would normally come in and do very specific things, and staff generally by nature have all types of roles within
Yeah.
one, and sometimes it's important to be clearly define what that volunteer is there to do, and not deviate too much, because they're there to do a very specific thing and give their time to do it.
Yeah. And actually that's something, the joy of the volunteer role,
Well, this is
isn't
it,
it?
isn't
It's
it?
got that kind of luxury of focus. Yeah.
The biggest thing is education of it's the hardest message is culturally. That's fine. We're talking about from the top of the tree, if you like, culturally down. But actually, when you've got a large team of casuals and other members of paid staff, that culture is very much harder to manage that and appreciate that volunteer role.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And certainly in my experience, is that hearts and minds stuff, so that people really get what it is that volunteers are bringing, so that they're then kind of in a better position to work with them in an appropriate way. Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's good. Under 15-year-olds unable to volunteer beyond 7 p.m. Yet there's a whole load of rules and regulations about young people volunteering and how many hours they can do and all sorts of things. And certainly, yeah, as you say, the when they can do those hours as well. And, you know, safeguarding, loco parentis, all of that stuff.
Yeah, because we had it basically, obviously, in line with the director that obviously anyone under 15, because they volunteer at a theatre for us. So anyone under 15, so 13 and 14-year-olds have to be on site because our insurance doesn't cover it. But it's, as you say, doing all the risk assessments, making sure parents are picking them up. And then also then from 16 to 18-year-olds, they're allowed on site legally up until 10 o'clock. However, then we're looking at saying, you know, what is good practice and that kind of stuff as well. So it has caused a few issues, I guess, but it's just making sure, because then there's the law and then there's what is good practice, and that's two different things, I guess. We had if we had like an 18 or 17, 18-year-old left the theatre at 10 o'clock, they're walking through a town and stuff like that, and on a Saturday night, and so there's all those sort of things as well. So it was just quite interesting we were dealing with, obviously, because they told us that the HR policies, so our insurance covers as long as it applies to a paid member of staff. So obviously then we have to follow those policies and processes. So that's where it kind of linked, that basically our insurance and our public liability insurance will cover us as long as we follow basically HR processes, I guess.
Yeah. And that's really interesting what you said there, because there are so many dimensions to this. As you said, there's the law, but then there's best practice. There's also, you know, making sure you do thorough risk assessments, so you really think through the whole kind of sequence.
Duty of care as well, haven't we? We've got a
duty of care, and as you say, insurance.
At 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening. You know, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, yeah. And just sort of, you know, even on a simple thing like volunteer drivers or not volunteer drivers, but volunteers who drive, they might come to their place of volunteering in their car. I've come across situations where if they've had an accident and make an insurance claim, their insurance provider can be a bit iffy about whether that is you know, social and leisure or whatever, personal and leisure use, that the volunteering aspect. So there are very many nuances to this whole quality area too, an awful lot to kind of think through when you're devising your policies and procedures. Yeah. Okay, so some good stuff there. Let's have a look at quality area 3 then. Okay. So quality area 3 is all about volunteer inclusion. So this is about, as you'd expect, there being a positive approach to embracing inclusion, equity and diversity. But I think the key word in this one is about proactivity. So it's about how to have a proactive approach to making volunteering as accessible as possible. And that's beyond just recruitment. That's thinking about the kind of roles that you have on offer, what time those roles occur, where they occur. And it's just really thinking through, is there anything about the volunteer roles that you are offering that could be off-putting to some people or could include barriers to their involvement, just kind of things that you might not immediately see, but it's really kind of unpicking that so that you're kind of opening up the opportunity to volunteer to as wider audience as possible. So let's just have a think about what you can do to actually implement that in practice then. So any thoughts around how you apply those excellent principles on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, what we did is, I must admit, sort of pre-COVID, it was very much like volunteer opportunity, the opportunity, and people fit into the opportunity. And I think during COVID and kind of post-COVID, we've changed a little bit. So it's much more that we, you know, if someone wants to volunteer, we would adapt an opportunity or we would create an opportunity. So we had a Red Cross volunteering project, which was lottery funded, and it was going to be in person and in groups, but because of COVID, it all had to go online. So it had pros and cons. I mean, the pros were they did a lot more hours on the project because obviously people were at home, but it just really changed our kind of a viewpoint, a mindset about actually, if we want to be more inclusive, it's about trying to develop opportunities and be much more flexible and supportive. And that's what we're trying to do a bit more. Whereas, as I said before, it's very much, this is the opportunity, fit into it or don't fit into it. You know? And I guess that's what we're trying to do. To be a bit more inclusive and supportive, and also then in line with working with partnership agencies that have might have people that aren't representative in terms of our volunteering, like disability and things like that. So basically we then access them via them, because we were trying to recruit, saying, right, well, we need to recruit people that fit into these areas, and it was very much like we were kind of cold calling as opposed to actually let's work with the experts and that kind of stuff. So it's just changing our thinking, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, you know, I mentioned the NCVO research and just exploring what people want from their volunteering today, as it were. So, you know, there's lots of things. They like flexibility, they like opportunities to maybe do micro volunteering, you know, small short bursts of volunteering rather than a regular every Tuesday afternoon commitment. And so there's a real mix of different kind of motivations and offers that volunteers have, if you like. Yeah, including volunteering from home and all that kind of thing. And I guess but on the other hand, you know, I think almost all organisations, apart from those that are volunteering infrastructure ones, you know, that their reason for being is usually specific. It's to serve a particular client group. It's to, you know, implement a particular cause or whatever. So it's all about getting the balance, because, you know, never should it shift towards all your attention being just satisfying what volunteers want to do. So it is that balance between meeting the needs of the organisation and meeting the needs of volunteers. But yeah, it is about kind of understanding what you can offer and thinking quite creatively about that. Yeah. There's a lot of really good stuff coming up in the chat there around that, which is great. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And I think, you know, David, you alluded to something, kind of talk to the experts. If there are groups in your volunteer pool who are underrepresented in terms of local communities, go out and talk to those local communities. See if there's, rather than just go out to them as a recruitment exercise, go out to them and see if there's any kind of joint work you could do together, some sort of co-production or whatever. And that's the way to kind of diversify the pool, I guess. Yeah, which is excellent. Fantastic. Yeah, and take what Ellie's saying there. Obviously, there are restrictions around that. There'll be accessibility restrictions. There'll be rules about age limits. Some organisations, for example, in the drug and alcohol sector, specifically want people who have lived experience. So you will have your volunteer criteria, but within that, it's about that diversification. Yeah, smashing. Okay. Lovely. I said, really worth looking at the chat, and I know it gets captured and you'll get that because there's some really good stuff coming up in there. Okay, let's have a look at the next one then. So quality area 4 is then about how you actually bring volunteers into the organisation. So it's your whole kind of onboarding process. And the word easy is the key one here. So it's about making it as easy as possible for people to find out about opportunities in your organisation. And then once they've found out about them, it's as easy as possible for them to apply and go through whatever recruitment process that you have. So you don't overly bureaucratise that. And within that, there is ample opportunity for them to really explore whether what you're offering is going to be a good fit for them. And I think in the past, it's tended to be the other way. You know, the recruitment process is all about the organisation looking at whether that person is going to be a good fit for them. It needs to be really mutual. So it's a kind of two-way thing. You know, they have that chance to explore that with you. And this one also encompasses, having been through all that process, how you then induct the volunteers. So how do you make sure that they've got all of the information that they need, they've had all of the training that they need, they know who their go-to person is, they're really, you know, clear on their first day exactly what that's going to be like, and they feel really kind of comfortable and confident when they join your organisation. So what sort of things might you do to make sure that all that happens, basically?
I think, Janet, it's interesting, this, and the balance is really it's a tricky one. And one of the things that we switched from a manual system using Excel spreadsheets and all that fun stuff last year to using this Team Kinetic software. So we would so all the opportunities are pretty much laid out, and
Yeah.
the role, all those kind of things are, so people kind of know what they want to do before they make that expression of interest initially,
Yeah.
on the whole, and that doesn't always happen. But so we approach it, I guess, in different ways, but the main way is obviously initially always have a meeting and a discussion about what volunteering is about, what it means, what, just to clarify, because we deal with two ends of the scale in terms of, we deal with a lot of young volunteers from actually 13 to 16 thinking about DBSs, so that's something to have those discussions and what have you about. But that brings different challenges with, if there are parents present in those meetings. Some of the topics are fairly adult in terms of codes and conduct, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, but things you have to discuss because that's part of our handbook. And we've got so rather than read it all verbatim out, we use that as a guide for the conversation. We ask questions, getting to know them a little bit, and you can soon figure out whether they're comfortable in speaking to a stranger online, because that's what they're doing effectively. But all of our volunteer roles are customer facing, so they need to be able to speak to me. If they can't speak to me, how are they going to speak to customers and children and all the other various different roles that we have? So understanding those things and then being able to think, well, maybe that role isn't suitable for you at this point, and maybe we want to build up the confidence for you, and maybe this one will be a bit more appropriate. And so it allows you to have that two-way process. And we used to have a process where they'll go away and commit and say, they would say initially, right, that this isn't about you saying yes or no to volunteering. This is about me not scaring you away, really. There's all the information laid out for you. Now you can choose if you'd like to proceed. You need to confirm, and we'll continue the conversation, and we'll look at you. And the hours, it's difficult again because they're very specific in a lot of ways. You're not really supposed to dictate what hours they do, when they do, how they do it. But again, because it's customer facing and support products, if you like, there needs to be some structure there. They can, but ultimately they choose if they want to do it or not. That's entirely to them. So once we've done all that general stuff, we move on to site specific, going on to a different venue, and first line, now next meeting of who's going to manage you on site, how that works, and apply a mentor. It might be a swimming teacher or a coach or somebody else that looks after. So there's various processes and layers within that. And it's complicated, and is that best practice? So it's quite a lengthy process in a lot of ways, in terms of, so there's lots of things to go wrong potentially. You want to evidence everything as you go along, ideally, but things aren't quite set up as we were talking about this through in the Team Kinetic. It's like, I can't check the box for certain things because they've got checklists on personal profiles, but it doesn't necessarily fit right now because of our screening process. So it's
a bit more fluid in reality, isn't it?
We want it to be. We want it to be fluid, but ultimately I want people to, are we going to consider people for a DBS? If they're under 16, have we got parental consent? And I want it to be visible. So if I'm communicating, I want those guys to be visible as well. And the system helps in many ways. But again, I don't know if anybody else have these kind of problems, but it's that we've got a variety of roles. There's lots of opportunities, but the biggest problem we probably have is those mentors and those supporting acts, if you like, on the individual sites, being able to support consistently the roles, and that's kind of the rolling out bit, and so I'm looking at some kind. I'm not even sure what this is going to look like yet, but some kind of onboarding training for providers, if you like. I think that's the way to do it. This is what we should be doing now, right? How do we train them? One, to not only, this is the volunteer management system, but these are the things you need to be talking about. These are the things you need to be developing. But now you're then talking about a whole new management system of training for volunteers. So there's a lot of layers there. It's very complicated.
Absolutely, and as you know, as people in the chat have been saying as well, because it's, unlike kind of recruiting a member of staff where you're kind of choosing the best person out of a pool, really you start from the position you're likely to take everyone who comes. So you want to explore with them what they want from the experience, what you can offer them, why they're doing it, what they feel they're bringing, and capturing that somehow, so that you can, you know, one of the things that, you know, I think it's really important in volunteer management is that you try and meet people's motivations. So at this stage that we're talking about, you want to be thinking about, will we be able to offer them something that is going to meet what they're looking for from the experience? But capturing that and measuring against it, I think is really, really difficult. And you were saying, you know, you've got multiple sites and so on, and it gets even more complicated when you do have what you might call ad hoc, or, you know, once a year volunteers, or dipping in and out volunteers. Trying to get them into the system is also a challenge, I think, that needs thinking through. Yeah. Okay. Oh, look, yeah, Rhiannon, love any tips. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So but I think, you know, this is where data management systems come into their, you know, their own, really, this whole kind of area of onboarding the volunteers, because you can, as you were implying, Keith, you can track the bits you need to do. So, you know, have the references come back. Do I need to chase them? Has the DBS, does a DBS need doing? Has it been happening? You know, you can really do that so much easier. But as you said, it's complex to have the right fields and fill them in at the right time, I think, is what you were saying, really, Keith, because it is a fluid process of involvement. You know, it's making sure it happens at the point it needs to happen without kind of imposing that artificially. Yeah, sympathize with that. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the next one, because I'm aware of time. So quality area 5 then is once you've been through the process of bringing volunteers into the organisation. Obviously, once they're up and running and deployed, you need to be providing really good support to them. And this one is all about how volunteers feel in terms of the support that they get. And it's interesting from an assessor point of view. When I do assessments, I interview lots and lots of volunteers as part of the assessment. And, you know, I ask them questions about, do they feel supported? Do they feel that they're part of the organisation or part of the team that they're working with genuinely, and not just an adjunct? And do they feel that what they're doing is making a difference? So this encompasses things like, you know, good communications with volunteers, consultation with volunteers rather than just informing them, making it really good culture for them to raise ideas and suggestions, or anything they're not happy with, just creating that whole kind of environment where that's okay, and basically just feeding back to them about the difference that they're making. You know, actually using some of the data to say, you know, look, I mean, an easy example is in charity retail, for example, where you've got shop volunteers. You know, it's quite easy to share with them the shop takings, if you like, and they can see how well their efforts of how much money their efforts have brought into the charity. And then I worked with one recently this year with a string of shops, and they had a bit of a league table, a fun league table, not an oppressive one, where the different shop volunteers in the different shops saw it as a bit of a competition of who could make the best profit that week or whatever, which was really nice. But yeah, so just kind of making sure you let volunteers know what impact their involvement is having. So how many of you feel that you could confidently say, if I were to just appear tomorrow and ask your volunteers, do they feel well supported, well involved, well consulted, excellent comms in the organisation? Who'd stick their neck out and say, oh yeah, our volunteers would say, yeah, this organisation's cracked it?
I would say it would be a little bit hit and miss. I think a percentage would be good.
Yeah.
And the percentage would be maybe not so good, and that's probably based on the volunteers as well.
Yeah,
there, but probably more so the providers, if you like.
Yeah.
Not being maybe as interactive, and me not having time to chase them. Say, have you done that? Have you? And that's the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Annabelle, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say something that I've been really trying to work on is this. So with the people, especially that I'm not able to make that personal connection with. So a couple of ways that we've been trying to do this is establishing a volunteer anonymous survey. So we're on our second one, it's the second year, and that's just really where they can give honest feedback.
Yeah.
But then not just leaving that, you know, to just linger, taking it to managers and creating an action plan with it.
Yeah.
And going back to them honestly with the things we can change and the things we can't. So just really including them in the conversation.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in the second survey, we've got like a larger response rate. So I think that that's showing that they kind of are engaged, but that's not good enough on its own. Like we've introduced supervisions as well, so asking them one-on-one about it. But I think you'd still get maybe you'd get 20% that still said that they didn't feel fully supported. So there's always places to improve, but that's what we've tried to start to do. Seeing some progress.
I was going to say, I think that's really interesting, because I was going to say absolutely that you said we did. You know, I've seen that happen quite a lot, that you do an initial piece of work, and then as long as you go back and say the you said we did kind of thing, more people get involved the next time round, and then, you know, it sort of snowballs from that, when people can see that their comments and feedback is being actioned or considered at least. Yeah, we
have about 85 volunteers that are active, Rhiannon, so it's not probably as large as yours, but it's something we've tried. And the first survey would have got like a 30% response rate. I'm seeing it's about 45 so far. It's closing on Friday, so you know that I take that as a little positive, but I know it's not like perfect and still a lot to improve. But no,
that's great. But the fact that you've opened that door, I think, is the important bit. Absolutely.
It can be daunting as well, because you're thinking, what's going to come back here?
Yeah. Rhiannon, do you want to say something?
Yeah, and thanks, Annabelle. I guess a couple of points for me is kind of doing some of these things at scale. So before I joined the organisation that I'm in, I've been there nearly 6 years. My team used to do one-on-one supervisions, but it would take them 6 months to complete them with the scale of number and to do it properly, that you literally didn't have time to do anything else. So it's kind of then thinking about how you do them. So one of our teams, we have 200 volunteers in the visitor facing group, 300 in the other team, and 800 plus across the 2 sites. So it then begs the question of kind of automation can support with some of these, but actually tailoring that journey becomes increasingly difficult at scale. And so my question earlier about tips, any tips on that? Really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think, you know, it's a weird thing, but it's actually larger organizations who do find investing in volunteers more challenging than small organizations, because small organizations have such a personal relationship with their volunteers. It's usually lovely, as it were, all lovely. But larger ones, as you say, that scaling up, it does become more of a challenge. And I think it's about keeping the dialogue open. I mean, you know, I said at the beginning, not many organizations don't pass straight away with the accreditation, but there was one I did just before Christmas last year, and it was very much because the bigger they'd got, the more closed down things had become. So, and everything felt a bit kind of tokenistic. Yes, there was an annual survey, but it just seemed to disappear into the you know, the ether, really. So it is challenging, but it's just about keeping the channels open, really. Or even if they are only electronic channels, they don't have to be like one-to-one face-to-face supervisions, but just knowing that if I was a volunteer in your organisation, I could send someone in the centre an email and get a reply. Just that alone is enough, you know, for many volunteers. Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's look at the last one, because it sort of follows on quite nicely from number 5. So number 6 then is all about kind of how you show that you value your volunteers. So again, it's, you know, when you do the assessment, it's pitched at asking volunteers, do they feel valued? Do they feel that they have opportunities to grow within their role? And do they feel connected with the organisation, with other volunteers, with the wider maybe service user group? Do they know who the trustees are? Do they see the trustees? Do they feel kind of like really integrated in the organisation? And is their kind of their contribution celebrated, if you like? I guess is what that one's all about. And what's really interesting, I'll just share with you about this one, is that one's actually quite hard to crack. And I can remember doing a very large animal charity a few years ago, and every year they had a big retail section as well, and every year at Christmas they would give all of their volunteers like a goodie bag which had all of their branded goods in it, you know, things like, you know, doggy bowls and cat toys and all sorts of things like that, and some pads and pens and everything. So really nice, good quality goodie bag. And when I did a survey with those volunteers, because it was a large organisation, and it roughly fell about 50-50. 50% thought that was amazing and it made them feel really special and really valued, and the other 50% thought it was the most colossal waste of the charity's money. So how you show that you value volunteers is a really kind of individual thing. And the other thing I'll share with you when I do assessments is I ask staff, how do you show that you value volunteers? And they talk to me things like annual awards ceremonies, summer barbecue, sort of seasonal party around Christmas time, those kind of things. That that's what they talk about. Long service medals, all of that. I ask the same question of volunteers, and completely different answers. Oh, they always thank me when I come in, or they show an interest in my grandchildren, or the fact I've just been on holiday, or I'm getting over an illness. Those were the things that made volunteers feel valued, but staff kind of have the sense that it's more the sort of structural things. And I always think that's really interesting, because the one-to-one showing an interest, how's your granddaughter, is free, whereas the big awards ceremony has a budget attached to it. But I just think that's really interesting, and it underlines to me that you have to value people in the way that they will feel valued, if you like. Yeah. That said, there are a fair few volunteers who do quite like their long service awards and that kind of thing, and special treats. Yeah. And I think one of the nicest, most creative ones I came across recently was whether it was a sort of medium size, an organisation with about just under 200 volunteers, I think, but they sort of formed relationships with various things in their area and organised little trips for sort of 20 volunteers at a time, sort of behind the scenes things. So behind the scenes at a brewery, behind the scenes at a pottery, and those kind of things that you wouldn't, as a member of the public, get access to, but they were kind of real nice little treats for volunteers. Yeah. Anybody got any good tips to share about how they can, how their organisation shows that it values its volunteers?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, last year we started doing a mixture of things. So we do case studies. So we'll go down to speak to people.
Yeah.
I've kind of keyed in the market, and so trying to move it away from me for them to ask questions and get the story of why they volunteer and what they enjoy about volunteering, and actually get that to build into the recruitment of volunteers as well. So it's like an ongoing cycle there, isn't there? But it's a bit more human then, and I think ultimately we're all volunteering, and generally most of the roles within volunteering is about the humanity aspect to it, isn't it, one way or another? And so we're trying to develop that connection. But the other thing we started doing was just saying thank you. So getting the management team, senior management team, to bob in and literally call in to volunteers that were in the role of volunteering, or groups, and just we got some props made and made a big deal, a voucher, thank you for everything you're doing, and it was just a snapshot. And so basically, if we're on sites where they recognise some volunteers have done really well, and they're well recognized from their peers, then we'll make the effort to do that and move it around and try and make sure that the different roles as well, and people of different ages. I think we go from 13 to 83 or something along those lines in terms of the breadth of an age of our volunteers. So it's about really developing that connection, and sadly you're just not going to get around to everybody. I hope everyone has got somebody they can lean on through the mentor or local support as well. So you try and check in and send emails and say hi, use the chat functions, how we doing? Often they'll fall and there's no response, so you're relying a little bit on that local sort of link as well. So that's always a danger with surveys, isn't it? Well, I think 15% for a questionnaire is normally about right, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If you get anything more than that, we'll take it as indicative, and we'll hopefully we get something to work on, something to say, well, okay, they said we're doing good at this, so we'll take the word for that at face value. Thank you very much, and we'll try and do more of that. So
absolutely. But you hit on something in there, Keith. I think and again, Rhiannon was saying, when you scale up things, if you can delegate to local staff, if you like, who are responsible for volunteers, and they take responsibility for that that sort of contact, and this is where a system can come in as well. I mean, a simple thing that always goes down well is just alerting you to send out a birthday acknowledgement. If you can afford an actual birthday card these days with a post going up, that's great. But even if it's a birthday text or a birthday email or something, but it must feel personalized, not just the kind of corporate speak kind of birthday acknowledgement. I just want to share one more slide with you, and then we've just got a couple of minutes for questions, or not a couple of minutes, 5 minutes for questions. So I believe the slides are all coming out in your pack, but I just wanted to draw your attention to what I've put in here for you. So as I said at the outset, you can download the standard totally for free and use it to develop your practice. So there's a link there. There's also an online, again, free, what's called foundation level self-evaluation tool called IIV Essentials. And it's one of those things, a bit like a quiz. You go through and do multiple choice and it churns you out a little report at the end about, what you seem to be doing well and what you might want to focus on. And then obviously, if at any point in the future you did want to go for accreditation, as I said, there is a cost associated with that. And if you wanted to know what that cost would be, again, there's a link there to get a quote, and that would give you an idea of what that process would cost you. So I'll stop sharing there, and just that will give us about 7 minutes for questions, which is not too bad. Anybody got any questions about investing in volunteers in particular, or the process, or yeah, Annabelle? Oh, you're muted there. You have to unmute yourself.
I did the hand, but I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wondered if you had any success with people applying for funding to pay for like the investing in volunteers, because it is something that my senior management team talk about, but then they say we've got to find the funding for it.
Yeah.
And that's my idea. Like that's my next task, to like look for how I could possibly do that. But I just wondered if you've got any previous with that, you've heard anyone?
Yeah, I mean there have been foundations. I mean, most recently I think the Lloyd's Foundation has funded some organisations to go through. What seems to quite well if there's like a group of organisations and they approach something like a charitable foundation, particularly a sort of private sector charitable foundation, if that makes sense, but something like Lloyd's, and says there's 6 of us here and we'd all like to achieve this award, would your company or your corporate social responsibility help us with that? So yeah, it does happen. It certainly does happen, certainly has happened, not with enormous frequency, but it is possible. Yeah. Or sometimes actually hiding it in the bid for, not hiding it, but putting it in the bid for something else. So if you're applying for a project, you can have it as a tack on to, and we'd also like to achieve investing volunteers as part of this piece of work.
Yeah, that's good to know. Probably need to do a bit more work, like inside with the people that put the bids in to like get that groundwork done. But that's helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? We've got there Chris saying pitch the business case to management strategic tool. Yeah, definitely. David, yeah.
It's kind of going back in line with what was just said, really, is working for being part of a local authority. I know if I go for this and say we need to do, they'll say funding, no chance, really, if I'm perfectly honest. So I guess, but we can still work to those standards though, can't we? We can still go through because that's really kind of where we would like to go. But if I'm realistic, I've mentioned it before, and they're like, there's no way, we've got the cost at the moment, and obviously the local authority, we probably can't access funding.
Exactly.
Others can, but yet we still need to ensure that we're working at those levels.
Yeah, but absolutely, you can use it as a tool. We don't have to have the external kind of tick, if you like, that you have achieved it. Yeah.
Do other so have you done many for local authorities then? Have you?
I think some
sort of third sector.
No, there are definitely some local authorities. Right. I'll reflect more on my personal experience. I know I did Oxford City Council, I think. Trying to think who else. Yeah, off the top of my head, yes, there are some local authorities who have done it. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant, thank you.
Anybody else want to ask anything? No. Chris, I'll ask you a question because there's been some amazing stuff come up in the chat. Really good stuff. I'm presuming does that get circulated?
It does. We're going to try and turn it into something useful and make some blog posts about each of the sessions and pull together some responses to things that we can, where we've had something useful to say.
Great. because people have been sharing kind of ideas with each other, and there's been some really marvelous suggestions in there that it would definitely be worth everybody seeing.
We've been having a chat with Rosie from Historic Environment Scotland, who is an assessor for IIV in Scotland, looking at where volunteer kinetics sits within the process and how, as a product, it can support your IIV process. Because these things, the more embedded the software can be in what your day-to-day processes are, the better it is for the software, the better it is for you guys, the less these things sort of rub against each other. So it's very much something on our agenda to try and map that process into what we do as a product. And I had a really interesting conversation with Alan at Volunteer Scotland, and it goes back to that idea of pitching this as a strategic tool for the board, not necessarily as a reflective tool for you as a volunteer manager, although it's useful for that. But that kind of devalues its real value, its real sort of impact, which is going back to what Helen said this morning. The IIV process really should be a systematic process across all the systems and all the parts of the business where volunteering has an impact. So using it not just to see how you're treating your volunteers, but how volunteering is being applied across a system, across your whole system. That then, when you pitch that to the board in terms of reputation, in terms of efficiencies, in terms of compliance, and all the things that are sort of associated with the effective running of the organisation, is a stronger pitch than saying, I want to do this to look after my volunteers better, which tends to not go down that well. So that would be my sort of counter to the we can't get it funded argument. Is you need to work out the business case that makes it clear that you can't not get it funded, because not getting it funded runs a real risk for you guys, not meeting the standards that the sector is expecting of you. And certainly within those statutory bodies, that's a risk that boards don't like to take.
I was interested to see that London Borough of Newham's doing it. That's great. I used to live in Newham. That's good news. I'm at the end, aren't I? Yeah.
We are. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you for you sharing your experience and your knowledge on this topic. I know it's one of those topics that it sort of pops up every now and again where people. I always think when the sector comes under a bit of pressure, it pops up again. Don't forget what's important. Whilst you sort of have to go through all these changes and cuts and reinvent yourself. So thank you for sharing all that. And we've got until 3:15 for the little quick comfort break, and then we're into the final session of the day. David, you got your hand up?
Quick, get in there.
Can I just quickly ask then, in terms of investors and volunteers and going around looking at robust systems, obviously there's going to be a diversity of what data management systems are used, and I assume we're quite fortunate we use Kinetic. So does that play, and obviously that data management volunteers, does that play quite a big role in the sort of effectiveness of volunteering, sort of getting the quality mark, I guess?
I think it just makes it easier for you to produce the evidence. Let's put it that way. If you're a small setup with half a dozen volunteers, you could probably just do it off the top of your head or with spreadsheets or whatever. But the bigger the organisation, the easier it is if you've got a data management system, whatever that system is, to churn out the kind of evidence just like that, really. So, yeah.
Okay. Fine, thanks.
I want to say Team Kinetic. Definitely easier with Team Kinetic. Thank you so much, Janet. Everybody go and have a quick comfort break. Gethin's about to join us at 3:15. We will see you all back then for the last session of the day. Thank you for persevering and hanging in there with us. Almost everybody that started is pretty much there. We've not lost that many. We'll see you all in about 6 minutes.
Bye.
Bye.